Hi, this is Mallow with Zipperbat. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the theories that we've been having for The Wolf Among Us. Now, it's April the 12th right now, because it's really late. And so we're not really entirely sure where the story's going to go yet. Neither Skizicks nor myself have read through the comics, so we're not really going by anything of that. We're just strictly going by what we learned from what we know of the fables in real life, like the actual fairy tales, and what the game gives us. The Wolf Among Us is a plot that's driven by its characters, so to analyze it, we're going to be breaking it down by examining the individual characters and trying to see where things go from there. Okay, so the first character is going to be Faith that we discuss, and it seems appropriate because she's basically the catalyst that starts everything, at least as far as we know and how we're introduced to the story. We're going to kind of hop around. We're not going to necessarily go in order of the things you find out, because everything's a web. There's not really an appropriate place to start or end when it comes to these characters. So if you guys aren't completely familiar with the stories up until the most recent chapters, I'm not sure why you're listening to this, but go back, take a look through everything, maybe not even necessarily through our videos, just do it yourself. It's even better that way, and you'll be able to understand what we're talking about more appropriately. So if we look at one of the chapters during the interrogation scene with Dee, he calls her a bloody thief, and she said that he stole from the Crooked Man. What we suspect is that she actually stole the photos that depicted the sordid imagery between Ichabod and Snow. So what we think is, while in a session with Ichabod, she had the photos taken to blackmail him, possibly to pay off the Crooked Man. The Crooked Man, however, needs Ichabod to be in power. And besides, even if she did try to blackmail Ichabod, the money would come from the Crooked Man anyway. So he basically sends the Tweedles to get the photos back from Faith, because he can't risk these things getting out and ruining Ichabod. He needs to be in power because Ichabod is useless to him unless he's in that position of power. It's obvious that she didn't know the connection between Ichabod and the Crooked Man. I don't think anyone really realizes how deep this guy's pockets go. So let's take a look at some of the main interactions we had with other characters here. Faith and Lawrence. Basically, when you kind of figure out that pretty much everyone in town is indebted in some way to the Crooked Man, but Faith and Lawrence took out a loan from him. The interest, I imagine, was way too high, so Faith took a job at the Pudding and Pie. Crooked Man and Georgie are working together. I'm not sure what the actual deal is between them, but it seems like people who have debt, hot chicks that have debt, end up working at his strip club in some capacity, or working alongside his strip club, which is the case with Beauty. We'll get into her later. So Faith works at the Pudding and Pie, probably starts off as a stripper. Lawrence finds out, he gets pissed off, tells her, don't do this, whatever, blah blah blah, and she's like, no, we need the money. He takes her cloak, which is her magical item. Quick little side note, if you'll remember correctly, Buffkin mentions that magical items are actually assigned to fables if they're not in the armory, and we know that the cloak was hidden by Toad in the first chapter, so obviously that item is not in the armory. The cloak, or donkey skin, whatever you want to call it, we don't know what its special ability is yet, but I imagine that it was in Faith's custody, and Lawrence decided he would give this to the Crooked Man in exchange for erasing their debt. This would explain why Lawrence's name wasn't actually in the ledgers when we investigated the ledgers in the Tweedles' office, because he basically erased the debt. That's fine. But Faith was not okay with this. This is a really special item to her, so she said, we can't do this anymore. She breaks up with him, and she goes to the Crooked Man, or whomever has the hide at this point in time, and tries to find a way to get it back. Now the Crooked Man, or again whoever, basically says, okay, we'll give it back to you if you do a series of jobs for me. In this case, it could be that this is how she got into prostitution. So let's move on to the Woodsman now, and how she relates to the Woodsman. If we think about the last episode, we know that Lily, Holly's ogre sister, troll sister, was in a professional relationship, I guess, with the Woodsman. And we don't know if it actually had any emotional attachment to it or not, but as far as we know, it was a client, professional relationship, whatever. The Woodsman has a big thing about being an unknown. So when Lily went missing, he had to go to a different prostitute eventually, if he wanted to, keep getting his fix, I guess. So Faith is sent instead of Lily. Now, Faith has no idea who the Woodsman really is. She doesn't recognize him. This pisses him off. This is a reaction that she wasn't expecting. Now, we speculate is that Faith was sent by the Crooked Man to steal his axe, which is his magical item. But because of his unexpected violent outburst and the intervention of Bigby, she wasn't able to complete this task. Now, it's possible that Lily was also asked to retrieve this axe because the Crooked Man, or Georgie, would have known that she was seeing him on a regular basis, seeing the Woodsman on a regular basis, and maybe would have recommended her to the Crooked Man, says, look, this chick sees this guy all the time, she can get the axe, no problem. And then she might have said no, and then she might have died. We don't really know precisely what killed her, but obviously it was a very similar reason to why Faith was killed. And Faith was killed because she was too much of a liability. Not only did she not get the axe like she was supposed to, but she's been stealing, well, call it stealing, but she took those pictures that she was not supposed to be taking. That's kind of what we're at for Faith, Lawrence, Woodsman, and the Lily mix. There's a couple things about Lily we're not sure of. For example, when you do the study of the body, you see that there's track marks on the inside of her thigh. This is unusual. Skizicks pointed this out to me because she said that it's noted that the fables heal very quickly. So the damage to her legs, the track marks, they probably should have healed over. Because of this, we think that maybe it's possible that these track marks were post-mortem, that they were put in after the flesh had gone necrotic, so it couldn't actually heal. But to what extent, to what reason, we don't really understand why. They're trying to give her the impression that she was a drug addict. I'm not entirely sure. Related in Georgie's little club is the character Vivian, and we only know her name from pretty much near the end of the most recent chapter. In the very first chapter, when Ichabod is talking about how he needs the wine because he's going for a massage first thing in the morning, isn't that odd? He says that it's Vivian who was the one who scheduled the massage. So we know that bottle of wine because we've seen it. We've seen it underneath Holly's bed in Lily's possessions. So Ichabod brings this wine to whichever prostitute he happens to be seeing. I imagine it doesn't matter who it is in particular as long as it looks like snow. So he brings this wine to the prostitute. Vivian obviously knows. That's the bottom line. Vivian knows that Ichabod has been seeing somebody. So she's been purposefully keeping information from Bigby. Definitely not as innocent as she seems. This makes me wonder, since we do not know what Vivian's fable persona is, how she fits in. She could actually be a wicked stepsister. She puts on a big sister act to the girls, but on the other hand, she knowingly puts them in danger. And in doing so, she gets special treatment from Georgie, so she doesn't actually have to work the floor, and she doesn't have to work at the open arms. I looked, and she doesn't even have a cubby in the back room, so she's not a worker in that sense at all. Alright, we're gonna get real with Beauty. There's a lot of shit to talk about with her. Alright, so again, we're gonna kind of go all over the place here, but it all adds up in the end, we believe. First, Beauty refers to knowing firsthand what it's like to be in a stalker situation when discussing the crime scene with Bigby in room 207. When they're looking at the photographs, she basically says, it doesn't stop here, it's only going to get worse and worse. I know that from experience. And it's like, okay, well, this doesn't fit her fable. There's no stalking situation in her story. in Beauty and the Beast. But it may refer to a past in the homeland that we don't know about because we didn't read the books or it wasn't introduced or whatever. On the other hand, she could be referring to the fact that she knows what they, as in the Crooked Man's minions, are doing because they've done it before. So here's the thing. Beauty gets in debt with the Crooked Man like everybody else, the same way Lily got in debt and Lawrence and what have you. I'm going to assume all three of them owe the Crooked Man money for similar reasons. So the women got into prostitution. Faith got into prostitution or a strip club, whichever, and Lily got into prostitution. Beauty didn't, which is interesting. She works of all things as a night clerk at a shady hotel. Just as a night clerk. Now this is speculation on our part, but if you're familiar with the original story of Beauty and the Beast, the old school one, Beauty actually did have a magical mirror. It wasn't exactly like it was in the Disney version. She had like a magical fan and then she had a magical mirror. And the mirror allowed her to see things similar to the magic mirror from Snow White. So if this is actually her magical item that she has, it would make her a very valuable tool as a spy, which would explain why she has that particular placement in the Crooked Man's plans, essentially. Like, she's able to see everyone who goes in and out of that building. This would also explain why everybody seems to know what Bigby does as soon as he does it, essentially, even if it doesn't really make too much sense. Like, how do the D's know so much about where Bigby is at any given time? We know that the D's are close with Beauty, or at least they're familiar enough with her. They do business with her, so she's probably one of their main contacts. I don't think that she's doing it because she wants to, obviously. I think she's being exploited into doing it. There's two cases in particular with the D's when they, with the Tweedles, not with the D's. With the Tweedles, Tweedledee in this case. During the interrogation scene, he says, "Oh yeah, we know Beauty really well." Which is, it sounds kind of creepy at first, but you pretty much know that it's not going to be sexual, just knowing how Beauty is. And two, during the funeral, Dee says, when Bigby asks, "How did you get here? How did you know I was here?" He says, "A little bird told me." So that kind of implicates that somebody has been telling him shit. And we're pretty sure that it's Beauty in this case. If you also recall, she was very interested in Bigby's investigation in the hotel room. She comments, "You're a better detective than I thought you'd be," which is kind of interesting because, I don't know, I just think it's curious that she wanted to know the motivation behind everything and hear exactly what he thought of everything. I think she was there for more than just to give Bigby somebody to kind of talk back and forth to so he wasn't monologuing. Now this, again, may be a stretch. I guess all of it is to a certain extent, but it's very possible that Beauty is the one who was actually taking pictures of Bigby and Snow. And when the first time we meet Beauty, she's kind of skulking around in the shadows behind a tree. Now, our first inclination is to actually believe what she's saying, that she's just, to trust her, there's a reason why she's hiding, there's a lot of creepy people around, and all that other stuff. Like, okay, fine. But at the same time, one of the pictures that we saw was actually a very similar angle to where we first see her, from behind that tree in the courtyard of the apartment building. This would explain why no one saw anyone unusual around the apartment. On top of that, she's extremely secretive to the point where she doesn't even want to be included on the report that Bigby's going to do. She says that she knows that Beast isn't going to see the report, but she would like to remain off it anyway. Why? Possibly because she knows that Ichabod or someone higher up who's involved with the Crooked Man is going to be able to see it, and they'll implicate her with Bigby, and then she'll get in trouble for basically fraternizing with the enemy. That's our thoughts on Beauty. Swinehart was a character that I really underestimated until this most recent installment. This is the only chapter that we see him in so far. We noticed that he gave sleeping pills to Holly to help her go to sleep. And this is because she was obviously very stressed and she couldn't go to sleep properly without any kind of medication. I guess Gren took some so he could get the high. He probably wasn't supposed to be taking them at all. But if we notice, the sleeping pills were also on the table beside Lawrence, prescribed sleeping pills, on the table beside Lawrence during his attempted suicide, or what we believe is an attempted suicide. It's possible that Crane didn't use poison in this case to subdue the Snow White figure in his fantasies, but he used sleeping pills to kind of give the impression that she was unconscious. There are other means as well, but this would kind of give in with the idea of forced sleep, you know? So Swinehart is obviously a little bit looser with his pills than he probably should be. Also, we sort of forgot about Faith's head and her body. I mean, her body was never found, but her head was damn well found. The last mention we hear of it is in Chapter 2, and Snow says that Swinehart has her head and is examining it, but that's all we know, and it's never mentioned again. It's really strange that he has this in possession. Now, if you know the actual story of the three surgeons, which is the Grimm fairy tale, it's about three surgeons who are basically so amazing that they go around the kingdom and cut bits of themselves off and sew them back together again to impress the king. And they get money for it, because I guess that's entertainment. So during the one story, he cut out his own heart, and I guess he went to sleep or something, like just didn't put his heart back in, because it was accidentally replaced with a pig's heart. And he sewed the pig's heart back inside of his chest, and he had a special lotion that he was able to put onto himself, and it heals everything. So if this ointment is his special item, his magical item that he has, then it's possible he could even sew a person's head back onto his body. We don't actually know. The point is, Swinehart is definitely a central figure in this that's really, really playing under the radar. He has a lot of medicine at his disposal. He has Faith's body. He's the only person who has any part of Faith, so we have no idea if she was even glamored and Faith is still alive, because we didn't have the head around us long enough to see if the glamour wore off or not. We're not even sure if he has Faith's cloak, because we don't really know what happens to that either. Snow says she's going to take care of it, but she either leaves it in the taxi, or she leaves it with Swinehart, just because we don't really see her go anywhere with it. It's very strange. We'll go into Taxi and Crier, who is the driver of the taxi, and the background of many other aspects of this game, and a couple characters down. So before we go into him, let's take a look at Toad. When we go into in the first chapter, we kind of see that Toad has been looking in on the magic mirror, and if you ask the mirror what Toad was looking at, he'll reply that he was looking up Rapunzel, Rose, and Cinderella selling shoes. So it's interesting that he was looking up these three characters, and for a while I was wondering why is that possible? So it's very possible, actually, that Toad was looking up Rapunzel, Rose, I'm going to assume Briar Rose and not Rose Red, and Cinderella, because he was checking up on their magical items. He was trying to do Faith a favor by keeping her items safe. So he checked to see if the other princesses had their artifacts safe as well. I'm just going to assume what their items are based on what I know of the fairy tales. Rapunzel's is a braid, because her braid was cut off. Rose is the spindle that she pricked her finger on, and Cinderella's is obviously the glass shoe. So it could be that Toad is acting like a huge dick, but he's actually doing a really nice thing for a lot of the fables. In Chapter 3, Tweedle's office shows that Cinderella is in Europe, according to a guy named Crispin. I'm not sure who Crispin is. Maybe they're trying to keep a tab on her items, maybe they're looking for her, and that's why her folder is in their office. So it seems to me that the Crooked Man is trying to collect everyone's magical items. Sometimes he'll get them in debt, so they have no choice but to part their items, but he's trying to get all of their stuff. To what end, I'm not exactly sure. I'm assuming that if you have all these items, you're going to be powerful, but if there's some overlying goal besides just being powerful, it's unclear at this point. It should be noted that in the first chapter, after you stamp deceased onto Faith's entry in the Book of Fables, Cinderella's entry is right beside her, nicknamed Cindy. all the information's classified, and it doesn't give you any kind of hint as to what it could be. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the character of Crier. He's the ginger guy who you see a couple times in the background. He's subversive enough, like he's kind of hidden there, like a Where's Waldo kind of figure. But is he a bad guy? We were trying to figure out where he could be originated from. I think he could be the boy who cried wolf, thus Crier, right? If that's the case, he's a known whistleblower in the Fable community, and his homeland career was specifically to watch for wolves. Did you find it as weird as I did that Snow was out that late, or that early, when she discovered the head of Faith? She lives in the woodlands. No need for her to be out late, because her job is in the woodlands, her apartment's in the woodlands. So what if Crier is actually her informant, and not the Crooked Man? So he's not a bad guy, he's working for Snow. She does sort of do a weird acknowledgement of him in the hallway right before the head is discovered. I think she has him follow Bigby around and keep tabs on him because she doesn't entirely trust Bigby to do the right thing. She keeps it a secret because she knows that it's going to upset Bigby if he found out that, he was being followed, obviously. So Crier was following Bigby home on the first night, and he was the one who found the head. He then reported it to Snow, who claimed the discovery herself so she could kind of cover for Crier. And that's what I think about that. I think that Telltale makes him just obvious enough that people notice him and think, hey, what's that guy in the background? He's kind of shifty. But I don't actually think that he's a bad guy. We learned in the last chapter that Snow's husband had an affair on her. Now, when I came up with this theory, I actually had based the idea of an affair on a much bigger comment, and it was a much greater stretch, but I thought it was dramatic enough to work. There's still some information, though, that isn't exactly explicit yet, so I'm just gonna go through that now. Snow's ripped photo. So in chapter 2, we find a photo of Snow in the glamour charm. Snow mentions that it's her sister Rose, and I'm going to assume it is Rose Red from the fairy tale Snow White and Rose Red, and not Briar Rose. They sometimes combine characters together who have similar names in fairy tales, so like they combine a bunch of Jacks together. Like Jack Horner and Jack and the Beanstalk are the same characters. So I'm not sure if Rose Red and Briar Rose would be considered the same characters. Probably not, because you see Briar Rose's apartment on top of the woodlands. I'm babbling, I apologize. So Snow White and Rose Red. That's how the story goes. So I think it's very possible that the affair actually happened between Snow White's husband and her sister Rose Red. And maybe they ran off to Europe together or something, where Cinderella is. Or maybe he decided, screw Rose Red and let's go to Cinderella instead. Maybe Cinderella was the one he had the affair with, I have no clue. These are just things. Obviously there was some kind of great calamity that separated her and her sister, because that's why the picture was ripped in half. That was just my first thought on that. There's a couple of incidental things that we noticed. I'm not sure if they have any greater significance. We're not sure if they have any great significance yet, but maybe they will down the road. Maybe we're just really stretching. Maybe all of this is a lie. But we were really curious about Bluebeard and the Butcher, because people keep referring to this character as the Butcher. We don't know anything about this character. It's just literally referenced only in name. So who is it? So obviously connected to the Crooked Man in some context, because the Crooked Man symbol, which is a broken man on a wheel, is present on the packages that are meant for this character. So Skizicks suggested that Bluebeard and the Butcher are the same, because, Bluebeard's past was that he beheaded women, and he put them in a room. If you want to get, analogies or whatever, you could say that he put them into a cold room, which would kind of give the impression of him being a butcher, keeping the meat in the fridge type of thing. So that's a very possible connection. In this case, that would imply that one of the reasons Bluebeard is so involved is not necessarily covering his own murders, per se, but he's trying to cover his own affiliation with the Crooked Man and illegal magic, black market magic. He has so much money invested that if he gets too caught up in illegal affairs, shit's gonna go down for him, right? Second interesting part was Antegrade Leaf. Now, I'm pretty familiar with most fairy tales. Like, I'm kind of a nerd about that sort of thing. And I never heard of Antegrade Leaf before at all. So I looked it up, and it seems that she's actually from an American folktale that is set in Brookhaven, New York. It's kind of surreal, actually. Because if that's the case, it seems weird that she's so possessive of this tree as part of the homeland or part of the old world, when she was always in America. And maybe that's why they don't have tabs on her. It's because she's not actually from homeland, because she was always from America. So that's why she's able to exist kind of on the fringes. She didn't come from the same place as them. Maybe I'm reading too much into the origins of these. Here's a really, 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 really minor one that could be a huge stretch, but in the off chance that it matters, I want to have been chronicled to have stated it. So, in the bar scene, when they're doing the brawl, it first starts, Gren turns into Grendel. Bigby grabs onto a stein on the table, and the stein is really ornate looking, and everything else is glass, like shot glasses or brandy glasses. And this particular mug that Bigby grabs says Roy, R-O-I, which means king in French. So he grabs it, intending to use it in the fight, but Holly grabs it, and she really firmly puts it back down the table. Literally everything else in that goddamn bar got trashed, except that mug. So it seems really out of place. Like, the scene is very strange, because it's just kind of like she intentionally pushes it back down again. Skizicks and I were wondering if maybe this is hinting towards the return of King Cole? Yes, again, it's a huge stretch, especially now that I put it into words like this. But who knows what Telltale is using as hints, right? So I guess this was kind of a long stretch. Ultimately, we don't know who the killer is, but we do not believe that it's any of the characters we've mentioned. They're all involved with it somehow. I'm guessing it's more related to this queen that Bloody Mary mentioned near the end. Hopefully the next chapter will have a little bit more to go on, but in the meantime, we're just trying to cancel out, scratch off the list, like a game of Clue, onto who could be doing what. There are actually 3 little last-minute things that I have to add that Skizicks and I kind of figured out last minute. Figured out as if we have anything solved. You know what I mean. Number 1 was kind of... No, I'll leave that one till last. We were looking through the characters, and we noticed that Jack is decked out in denim, looking absolutely hideous, but if we recall from the first chapter, one of the only clues that we had from the crime scene was a piece of denim, essentially. And for some reason, we've never really revisited it, but I don't think there's any other character with that shade of denim in the character roster. We know from a fact that, okay, you haven't seen it in the video because this was in our private playthrough, but we mentioned that Jack entered Ichabod's apartment. He was really, what's the word I'm looking for? Clumsy? Yeah, he was really clumsy. He knocked around a lot, and I think that by the grace of God only was he able to go unnoticed in any of his previous endeavors. So it's very likely that he cut himself during his escape. Now, did he kill her? Probably not, although I do believe that he could have been goaded into at least delivering the head for a fee. So, there's that. One more thing we were thinking about was the memory spell. We were trying to think of how Ichabod could be spending like 900 grand to in debt. So that's over 900 grand. So he has his normal expenditures plus that on top of everything else. We were thinking, he mentioned specifically that memory spells are extremely expensive. Possibly he's been using these with some regularity. If we look at Prince Lawrence, he's not confident that he tried to commit suicide. And we know that it's probably not likely that he did try to commit suicide, at least not based on the magic bullet, which is a really strange projectile. Also, the fact that he seemed to have taken sleeping pills on top of using a dagger to cut himself, on top of shooting himself in the fucking heart. What? And, yeah, really curious. And when he says about the things that are happening to Bigby, he's like, at least that's what I remember, that's what I think happened. So he's not even certain what happened. It's possible that he missed 24 hours at that point, because it also doesn't account for the blood that was on the bed. Unless he was, like, staggering around and slamming himself all over the place before he decided to sit down nicely in his chair. The last one, which is the most recent thing we were thinking up, and it's kind of fucking ridiculous. I'm kind of hoping it's not true. We were looking through the characters again, and we looked at Bloody Mary, and we looked at Nanny Greenleaf. And Nanny Greenleaf's description says she lost a child in the woods. So I said to Skizicks, oh, Bloody Mary is her daughter. And then we kind of laughed a bit. Then we thought about it. And then we took some pictures of Rachel, which is purportedly her daughter, Nanny Greenleaf's daughter. And we compared them to the adult Mary. And by God, if they don't look similar. Like, they have the same eye color, they both have freckles, they have a similar shaped mouth, they have the same hair color, the same hairline. I mean, one's a child and one's an adult, that's pretty much the only difference. I'm not sure how that's relevant to anything. But it's an interesting fact, if it were true. Yeah, I guess that's all I had to add, finish that up. Yeah, hope you enjoyed those little tidbits. So, hope you enjoyed our speculations on The Wolf Among Us. You guys can let us know what your opinions are. If you think we did anything really wrong, let us know, and we'll probably disagree with you.